All right, great. So here we go. The first question up is Joe. We'll put Joe here in the hot seat.
Okay. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Bernardo.
How are you doing?
Very, very well.
Great.
And my question relates to my sense that there are three states of consciousness. My experience of my life is from three states of consciousness. The first one is, in my mind, I label it the duality consciousness, time and space and ego, um, and that's all there is. Then the other state of consciousness is often goes by witness. Non-dual consciousness to me is witness consciousness.
Mm.
Sort of outside of space and time. It has none of the parameters of duality. It's non-duality, outside of space and time, and you just have awareness. I think it's an example, if you're familiar with Jill Bolte Taylor's experience of when her ego side went away,
Yes.
and she was in heaven.
Yes.
Everything was perfect, and no time, no space, nothing to do. All is perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a personal self in the duality state, a non-personal self in the non-duality state, and now I'm going to bring Jung into the play of saying that wholeness and who I am is like a orchestra conductor who can blend between both spaces and function and live and be in the present moment, which is both finite and infinite. It's a blend.
The self.
Yes. Okay. So we got three selves: the duality self, non-duality self, and the whole self, which is both and. And that's the goal of a whole person, is to be healthy in all three places, and your life is as good as it can get.
Yeah. I am with you.
Okay. So how does this relate to now? I kind of struggle to relate anything to that. That's my reference. So how does your kind of non-local mind fit in that scheme?
Yeah. We use some psychological metaphors then, because I think it will speak more to this group than to other groups. The way I see this is that since all we can really know is experience, we should be forced to, if we can explain the whole of reality on the basis of experience alone, we should be forced to stop there and not infer or postulate anything else. But if there is experience, then there has to be that which experiences. There has to be the experiencer. And to maintain our ontology as simple as possible, we could look upon experiences, in other words, the whole of reality, as movements or excitations or behaviors of that which experiences, like the dance of a dancer or ripples in water. There's nothing to ripples but water. There is nothing to a dance but the dancer in movement. So I would imagine that the whole of reality is experience, and the experience is the movement or the behavior or the excitation of that which experiences. Now, since knowledge is experience, the fundamental nature of the self with capital S, the third state of consciousness that you mentioned, is unknowable, because we can only know its movements, we can only know its behavior. That which behaves, that which moves, that which experiences is fundamentally beyond our capacity to cognize in any way. But when that which experiences dissociates from itself, imagine that which experiences a whole psyche And imagine that there is a dissociative process in that psyche, a set of emotions and ideas that evoke each other, but not the rest of the emotions, ideas, and other mental contents within the psyche. That creates a boundary within the psyche, or the whirlpool that Jeff probably talked about during the seminar. And this boundary is what gives rise to sense perception and the world of duality, because duality is a relational phenomenon, right? You have to take a position within a scale to know what's plus and what's minus, to know what's good and what's bad, to know what's past and what's future, what's here and what is there. It's a relational phenomenon that requires a localized point of view within a psychic space. I would claim that is a dissociated point of view within the psychic space. And ordinarily, we live in that mode, in that state of consciousness, because we attribute our identity to that of the dissociated alter, instead of recognizing our true identity as that which experiences the unbound consciousness within which space and time emerge, and therefore fundamentally outside space and time. Now, the second state of consciousness that you mentioned, that non-dual witness, it transcends the polarities, because it's no longer relational. It's like you're watching a dream. But it is not a fully integrated state yet, because you're still the witness separate from what is witnessed. So if the dissociation, the ultimate dissociation is our ordinary state of consciousness that obfuscates everything else going on in the mind at large, then this intermediary state of impartial witness is a semi-dissociative state. You no longer identify with the alter in terms of your personal identity, but you also don't identify with the whole yet, because you're still the detached witness. So I think these three states are on a sliding scale of dissociation and obfuscation of mental contents. No dissociation, no obfuscation, you are the self. You are the whole. There is no separation between you and other, between past and future, and you identify with the whole. But your intrinsic nature escapes you for the same reason that your eye can't see itself without a mirror. The intermediary state is already some dissociation. You already are in the position of witness, so you're already separated from the other, but you're not yet in full duality. There is already some obfuscation. And the third state, our ordinary state, is full dissociation, full obfuscation. We identify fully with the dissociated alter, and the world is alien and a threat to us, and we are immersed in space and time, as opposed to space and time being within us, which is the ultimate reality, I think.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll listen to the recording. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I hope I made some sense.
Yes, you did. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
This is kind of like worshiping at the altar.
Oh.
My name is Anne, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm studying to be a Jungian analyst, and I've woven some of your material into my thesis, which is what I have to finish to graduate, which has been really interesting and exciting. And I've been allowed two questions. So the first question I have is about your image of the ego protrusion folding back on itself as the avenue for imaging how self-reflexivity becomes possible. And I was curious if you're aware of the tie in alchemy. There's a certain vessel. It's called a pelican vessel, and it's kind of like the Klein bottle, the single-strand wire Klein bottle, which it folds back on itself, and is sort of like it's a bottle that's like a Mobius strip. If you pull it, it'll flip from inside to outside. I was just curious because I found that very synchronistic, that you are proposing an explanation, or the image of the explanation that is so close to something that's in alchemy.
There are many symbols that refer in some way, that symbolize self-reference. I mean, I can mention another obvious one, the Ouroboros, the serpent swallowing its own tail. So this idea of self-reference as something very important, built into the very core of reality, seems to be everywhere in symbology. It's difficult to claim what the alchemists were thinking about when they came up with that symbol. And I think it would be extraordinarily arrogant if I told you that, oh, that's what they meant, right? Because how can I know? I don't really know. I don't have access to their mental life. But I will say this. Even if that was not a reference to the inherent self-reference of the egoic state, I think there are many reasons to believe that they were hinting at something fundamental in association with this idea that the whole of reality is in mind. Because you see, out of one thing, we've created self and other. Out of pure potential for experience, we've created a universe. So there is a sense in which all of reality could only have emerged out of self-reference, because there was only one thing to begin with. So I think it is very significant that this idea of self-reference is there, but I suspect that they meant more than just the egoic loop. I suspect they meant something more fundamental behind the creation even of space and time itself. Even space and time, I think, arise from cognitive self-reference, which precedes and underlies the egoic loop. That's my intuition. I would like to claim to you that, yes, that's exactly what they meant is what is on my book, but I suspect they meant something more profound than that.
Well, I don't know. They both seem equally profound to me, because if you think about the vessel, and one of the commentaries about that particular vessel is that's the circulatio, where everything happens over and over. And this is related to individuation, which with each passage, supposedly, getting closer to integration or some semblance of wholeness. And if you think about that vessel opening up and spreading that out, that's sort of like your membrane.
That's interesting. I think I should look into that again. You're planting some ideas in my mind that I should explore more.
And I think it's interesting how the same forms show up in the metaphors. We think in alchemy, we know there actually were people working in labs. This wasn't just a metaphor. They actually had this equipment. But the form shows up over in the same places. To me, that's a sign that we're onto something that is universal. It does have a big holding capacity.
Interesting.
I'm running into someone else's time. My other question is, I'm curious if you could share with us, if you're willing, how you came to know Jung's work, because your use of it in your book is very cogent. And I couldn't find that anywhere in anything I tried to chase down. I wasn't stalking you, I swear. But I read some stuff on your blog and different things. So I'm just curious if you could share with us what you're willing to share about that.
I'm not sure I remember actually exactly how I came upon Jung. I had heard Jung's name since very early in my life. I can tell you how I started thinking about these things. I have a specialization in computer engineering and artificial intelligence. So I was one of those idiots trying to create a consciousness in silicon many, many years ago, based on a assumed, unthought through materialist paradigm. And in the process of creating those so-called artificial nervous systems, these philosophical questions started becoming very present in my mind. Questions like, is this conscious, what I'm doing? What is consciousness? What is mind? If I simulate some information flow on this piece of hardware, does it mean that I have a mind? And then that led me to read David Chalmers, who is a philosopher of mind. At the time, he was based close to Texas. I think New Mexico, he was based there. He's from Australia. And one thing led to the other. And in those early stages, very early on, I hit upon Jung. And what immediately resonated with me, of course, was this idea of the collective unconscious, a collective root that unified all personal psyches. Jung also talked explicitly about the collective unconscious being one with matter itself, which is a very non-dual idealist idea, very profoundly so. And Jung never claimed to be a philosopher. In fact, he was very careful about framing his work as psychology and psychology only. And I think it was his way to protect himself and maintain an empirical basis and not drift into what others could consider philosophical speculation. But his work is very, very highly philosophical. I consider him personally a philosopher before a psychologist. I think his psychology is profoundly informed by philosophical thought as much as it is by empirical experimentation and therapy and contact with patients.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello,
Hi there.
I'm Roberta Short, and I'm a writer.
Nice to
And I
meet
have a
you.
question.
Sure.
The question is, how does your idealist philosophy help us to understand precognition? I'm specifically very interested in precognition and how it works with concepts of the mind.
It gets into the difficult area of space and time, right? What is space? What is time? It's a subject I have been addressing recently in a new book, which Jeff very kindly wrote the introduction for, so he is familiar with that material. But it is material that is not yet published, and it's controversial and very delicate to approach from a rational, logical perspective, because it exceeds the boundaries of space and time. It exceeds causality. So I hesitate in giving you an answer that can be corralled in like 2 minutes, because it tends to require a lot of preparation before we can actually say what it is. Let me just give you an idea. I think beyond the boundaries of personal dissociation, when we are talking about mind at large itself, or the self with capital S, the cognitive activity there does not depend on space and time. I think space and time is a quality of the experience of a dissociated alter, not of mind at large itself. There is structure in the self. There is structure in the cognitive activity of mind at large, but it is not causality. It's not in space and time. It's akin to a cross-referenced database in which different entries in the database are linked to other entries all at once in the here and now. The cross-linking, the structure of the cross-linking, the cross-referencing does not depend on space and time. I think that is the cognitive structure of mind at large. Now, what is precognition? I think precognition is when the obfuscation of a dissociated alter, of a whirlpool, is reduced to a point where our awareness taps back into that space of mind at large that transcends space and time. It taps into that cognitive structure that transcends space and time, transcends causality. And if we can bring back some of that information into the field of ordinary awareness, we say, I've had a precognitive activity. I don't know whether I made much sense. I know it's very difficult to explain this clearly in a brief moment, but to put it in a nutshell, outside our personal alters, outside our whirlpools, cognitive activity is structured but does not depend in space and time. So if your awareness, if you manage to reduce the obfuscation that keeps us unaware of mind at large, we gain access to that structure and translate it back into the space and time mentality of our personal selves in the form of a precognition.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Do you include in your conception of it any notion of willingness, or do you see it as sort of receptivity? And would beingness be a word that can express the concept of mind or of non-causality that we can tap into?
When you said willingness, are you referring to free will?
No, I more mean intention. The intention to have a precognitive experience is very different from, at least in my understanding of it, the sense that the information comes, that you receive the information. So do you conceive of it as a receiving, or do you conceive of it as an ability to will it to occur?
I do not know. I do not know. I think both alternatives are compatible with my philosophical views. Which one is the correct one? I would trust more your daily empirical experience with patients than my philosophical speculations here. I think you have more data to make that judgment than I do. I would consider this even a statistical question. By interviewing people, we can ask, have you primed your precognitive experience with intention, or did it just come to you? And if 80% say I've primed it, there is your answer. I'm pretty neutral about which one of the two is the case.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Bernardo. My
Hello.
name's Christine.
Hi, Christine.
Well, first I want to say thank you for your books, and they're very interesting, and for hours and hours and hours of great video watching.
Thank you.
My request actually is, could you tell us a little bit more about this book that you have coming out?
The one that's not out yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. The title is More Than Allegory on Religious Myth, Truth, and Belief. I talk about these three topics: myth, truth, and belief. The part about myth is very much Jungian. It takes the Jungian position on myth as something that emerges from the collective unconscious and is observed by the ego as a reality outside of itself, but in symbolic language. But it's more than allegory in the sense that Henri Corbin used the word allegory. For Henri Corbin, an allegory is merely an alternative way to convey something that can be explained literally, while a symbol is a unique expression of something transcendent. So I think religious myths are symbols, not mere allegories. Part 2 is about truth, which gets into the question of space and time. It's an argument for the non-existence of space and time, for the idea that space and time arise within cognition through a trick of self-reference. And the hint to that is that we cannot define space or time without begging the question, without using space and time itself in the definition through the use of other words, like space is the distance between two objects. What kind of definition is this? Distance is another word for space. Or time is the interval between two events. What is that? Interval is another word for time. So that's the hint that space and time arise through a form of self-reference, and that in fact we are only living in the here and now, and nothing really happens objectively. The whole idea of history unfolding through an objective timeline is a fantastic cognitive hallucination that we can see through purely through introspection, purely through self-contemplation and self-inquiry. And that's the essence of part 2. And part 3 is a myth that I told about the story of a modern explorer of consciousness that joins a very advanced and secret scientific project, a la Contact with Jodie Foster, that movie, but not to talk to aliens, but to talk to the self, capital S. And that explorer then in the myth relates his experience. And the opportunity it gives me is that because I have been, in my 5 previous books, very rigorous, adhering to reason, empirical evidence, I have had to use space and time, assume space and time within my models, because that's what reason requires. Reason requires causality, the unfolding of the laws of logic and the laws of nature, which unfold within space and time. This myth allowed me to break away a little bit with rigor. It gave me more freedom to express more profound ideas that go beyond just space and time and literal models, and get into something that requires contemplation and introspection without really exposing myself, because after all, it's just a myth. So that's what the book is about. I feel that part 3 of that book sufficiently explains my ontology to a point that I don't think I will be writing another book with more elements of ontology in the near future. I think that will do for at least a few years.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eva.
Hi, Eva.
I'm a scientist, and I'm also a very dedicated meditator. And through my meditations, I have had experiences which were reminiscent of some of the great metaphors and thoughts that you have mentioned in your book. So my question that I'd like to ask you is that since you have said that there's nothing but experience, whether you have any views on how we can take the cognitive ideas that you have presented into experiential way that we can experience them in our daily lives, and how we can expand on this to kind of make it a part of our own experience.
What I'm going what I'm going to say is not really my idea, although it sort of follows from the philosophy that you have been looking at. I think it's all a matter of obfuscation. Egoic activity is self-referential. It pulls the focus of attention to a locus that's very tight, very constrained, and in that constrained locus of attention, that's where our lives, our ordinary lives, unfold, and it obfuscates everything else, like the sun obfuscates the stars at noon. So we live with the sun, but we forget the other 100 billion stars that are out there. I think the key to experientially accessing a broader reality is to reduce obfuscation. It is to quiet the mind, to quiet what neuroscientists call the default mode network of the brain, that part that gives you your sense of identity, of personal self, of personal history and continuity across time and space. That is the source of obfuscation. If that is quieted, much more comes into the space of awareness. And psychedelic research has shown, for instance, that the way psychedelics work is precisely by reducing cognitive activity in the default mode network. They basically cause a solar eclipse, so you can see the stars at noon. I think that is the key. And that unfolds into two different avenues. One is the Jungian avenue. It's active imagination. It's actively relating to the symbols produced by your broader psyche in the form of a conversation. So you don't destroy the ego, but you don't let the ego obfuscate the rest, so a dialogue can take place at a symbolic level. Another way is the way of the East, is the way of Advaita, the Yogacara school of Buddhism, which tries to transcend even the symbolic activity of the self and try to get at the root of being itself. That has a lot of philosophical value because it reveals to you at an experiential level that is self-validating. It reveals to you what the ultimate nature of reality is, which is your own mentation, tricking itself through a trick of self-reference into believing that it inhabits a world, where in fact the world unfolds within it. The Jungian avenue, I think, has much more practical application, because understanding and feeling the ultimate nature of reality does not do away with our demons. Some people in New Advaita circles call the attempt to get rid of your personal problems by experiencing the ultimate nature of reality. They call it spiritual bypassing. Your demons don't go away. You may have a clear notion of what's going on and even feel it, but you're still neurotic. You're still living with anxiety, with fear, with depression. Those need to be resolved. They are an intrinsic part of what it means to be a human being. So I think both avenues have their value, and the key to both is a reduction of our highly neurotic egoic cognitive activity, which obfuscates everything else and basically puts a blinder in front of our eyes, so we can't get to know ourselves or the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Where exactly are you?
I'm in the Netherlands, in the south of the Netherlands, very close to Germany and Belgium.
We're sensitive to the time factor here.
No, I'm jet lagged. I was in the US until 2 days ago. I'm highly jet lagged. I'm in California time still. I'm earlier than you.
It strikes me that so much of many of the themes of the question hover around the relationship between the personal and mind at large. Now, I noticed that we've been reading, specifically focusing on why materialism is baloney. And towards the very end, you say, it is a direct and unavoidable implication of my worldview that your consciousness, your subjective experience of being right now, will survive your bodily death. And I understood that, at least on the first reading, to mean personal egoic consciousness to some degree. So I didn't quite understand how that fit into the context of the overall philosophy and some of the metaphors. For example, the whirlpool is quite a temporary phenomenon that would seem to dissolve into the broader ocean. And we have spoken just in the past few minutes about the obfuscation of egoic cognitive activity in space and time. So just to push you a little bit further on this relationship between the personal and mind at large, are you saying here that that the personal self survives bodily death?
Not necessarily. When I said your fundamental sense of being, I didn't mean your concept of the ego, which you identify yourself with. I meant the universal beingness of mind at large itself, which transcends and does not depend on the formation of whirlpools. I think before we know anything, when we are infants, before we have any knowledge, we only have a primordial sense of being, what in the East people would refer to as the I am, that primary I am. Not I am something, not I am the body, I am the personality, I am the persona. No, I am, period. Pure being. I think every living creature has exactly the same primordial sense of I am. Me, my cat, a fish, an insect, an amoeba, they all have that primordial I amness, a pure sense of being. I think your sense of identity, your felt sense of being is one thing. It is this I amness that is intrinsic to mind at large itself and not to a whirlpool. And your personal sense of identity is a concept. One is your felt being, the other is a concept that arises within the egoic mind, and through belief and intellectual abstractions, you end up identifying with it. But it is conceptual. It's an activity in cognition. It is not the primordial, fundamental sense of I am, of beingness that precedes all that, and within which all that unfolds as particular experiences. If you were to forget everything you know right now, everything you think to know and believe, you would rest in that primordial sense of being, which is the same that you had when you were a kid. I mean, everything has changed for you since you were a kid. Your body is completely different. There isn't a single atom in your body now that was in your body 30, 40 years ago. Your thoughts have changed. Your memories have changed. Your beliefs have changed. Your environment has changed completely. Everything about the concept that you have of yourself as a person and your body has changed. But you still think you are the same person. What has stayed the same throughout that period of your life? What is the thing that has remained untainted, untouched by the world, by life, by everything that happened? It is that primordial sense of I am. I think when we die, that sense of I am continues because our entire life as people unfolds within that sense of I am. Not the sense of I am within our lives, which is the dramatic inversion of our culture today. Your life unfolds within that which you are. Therefore, when your life ends, your sense of beingness doesn't end. You probably just have a laugh and remember what is actually going on here. And since that sense of being is what you really feel to be, as separate from your conceptions of who you are, then it's really you that survive bodily death. Now, the next question is there still any sense of separation and personal identity after physical death? I don't know. There may be. And the reason I say that there may be is that I see absolutely no reason to believe that the physical body we see is a complete image of the whirlpool, a complete image of the dissociated altar of mind at large. I mean, it's not even, the body I see now is not even a complete image of your state of health right now. I can't see your lungs, I can't see your blood circulation, I can't see your digestive flora. There's so many things I can't see because the image I see is incomplete. So I see no reason to believe that in the higher scheme, the bigger scheme of things, our body are a complete image of the dissociation. So it is conceivable, and I go back to Jung's own metaphor, which is appropriate for this audience. It is conceivable that after the flower and the leaves die in the winter, there is a root system of personal identity, of individuation, invisible under the ground, that remains and flowers again next spring. That would be an allusion to the Eastern idea of reincarnation.
Right, but which may not be utterly immortal.
That itself may not be utterly immortal, indeed. But remember, ultimately, we are talking about hierarchies of dissociation here. So the possibility I remain open to is the possibility that this dissociative process within mind at large happens according to a hierarchy, and the physical body we see is the image only of the very end of that hierarchy. So when you die, you fall back into another level of dissociation that was already there to begin with. But it's all dissociation. The ultimate reality is the self, and the self isn't personal.
Thank you. That clarifies the whole question.
Thank you. I'm glad.
Good morning, I'm Beth.
Hi there. Hi, Beth.
Hi. I've been a student for many years of David Bohm's work, and I've been interested as I read your books, and I haven't read the fifth one of the series, but the others, there's so much resonance between your work and his. I'm just curious, is that just happenstance, or is he someone whose work has fitted into yours in some way?
I wouldn't say that I have been very inspired by David Bohm. I have read a couple of his works. I wouldn't say they were key influences on me, but I also wouldn't say that it is coincidental. His notion of the implicate order is not coincidental, because I think he has seen something that I and many others have seen too, and each one of us translated into his or her own set of metaphors and language. And so the coincidence is not casual. It comes from a common source that we all looked at in our own ways from our own perspectives. The implicate order of David Bohm, to me, is what I describe to as the reality behind perception. I see perception as an excitation of the boundaries of our dissociated altar, an excitation caused by the cognitive activity in mind at large, in God's mind. The ideas, feelings, and emotions in God's mind present themselves to us in the symbolic form of sense perception, the images of our consensus reality, of our empirical world. And I think, so we gain access to God's inner life through a second-person perspective that we call sense perception. That would correspond to David Bohm's explicate order. But the first-person perspective of God's inner life, the ideas and feelings in the mind of God, in the self, that first-person perspective would correspond to David Bohm's implicate order, which underlies and informs all reality in a non-local way that transcends time and space.
Yeah. The thing that strikes me as so similar in your discussion tonight with us is the whole issue of obfuscation and his effort through what he called his process of dialogue, of attempting to eliminate those assumptions that keep us hemmed into our personal sense of egoic self and keep us from direct perception of the higher.
Jungians know that we never live without a myth, right? We are always running myths because it's an intrinsic part of what it means to be human, to try to interpret what happens around us, to try to interpret the world. The problem is when we get locked into what I would call a deprived myth, a myth that is not in harmony and in resonance with the deepest intuitions of what Jungians would call the unconscious. I prefer to call it the obfuscated psyche or the obfuscated mind. So yes, if we get too married, too emotionally invested in a deprived myth, that will obfuscate everything else, and we will live a very constrained life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Travis. I guess
Hi,
I'll
Travis.
just identify myself as a lay student of Jung. My question is a little different than most of the rest of them anyway. I would call it a social science or a political question almost, and that is, if your ideas as you have presented them in these books prevailed over scientific materialism, what would you see not as the effect on the individual psyche or subjective consciousness, but rather in the objective world as we perceive it? How the world goes forward. If, just a few examples of how you think that would make a difference socially, politically, whatever, it would be interesting.
I think it would make a huge difference. Before, just a brief observation. I think a materialism is a metaphysics. It is not one with science. It just so happens that many scientists adopt the metaphysics of materialism. But science is agnostic of metaphysics. Science is a methodology for studying and modeling the patterns and regularities of the phenomenal world. It's completely agnostic of ontology and metaphysics. But it is a reality today that these two things, science and materialism, are perceived almost as being one, because the spokespeople of science are also spokespeople of materialism, and usually they are not very observant people, unfortunately. So what would change? What would change? Consider this: if all there is matter, then what other conceivable goal or meaning there could be to life besides the accumulation of material goods? There can be none else. If all that exists is matter, and we are condemned to oblivion anyway, and there will be nobody to regret after we are dead, then what is the earth but a resource to be plundered? And screw the next generations, because you're not going to be here to regret or feel bad about it anyway. You see, the implications of materialism are subtle, but very pervasive. I don't want to use the word subconscious, at an unconscious level, between quotes. If our mainstream cultural narrative would change to validate the ideas behind idealism, non-duality, these ontologies of mind only, of consciousness only, all these things would change. The meaning of life would completely change. Our horizons would change. The things that we consider important, our value systems would change. Notions of dominance and power would change, because after all, we are all dissociated authors of our single mind. I think it would change very dramatically. It's very difficult to predict exactly what the changes would be. And looking back in history, we see that everybody who tried to make these predictions ended up being wrong to a large degree. So I don't want to risk predicting exactly how things will unfold, but I can say with at least a high degree of certainty to my own satisfaction that a lot would change, and that the change would be positive for us as people, for the meaning and perspectives of our life in society, and for the planet as well, and the sustainability of our existence within these confined boundaries of planet Earth.
Well, it strikes me that trying to speak globally about it, that you are attempting to recover a greater sense of transcendence for the individual in the world, and that carries with it a certain moral implication in terms of how we deal with each other, and therefore would impact every aspect of our
Absolutely. I would say even more than moral. I would even use the S word, spiritual. There are spiritual implications. There are profound psychological implications. I mean, your work as therapists, it's very hard to disconnect that work from some form of ontology. How do you help the patient find meaning in his life unless you have an ontology that opens space for meaning? How do you help the patient transcend unless you have an ontology that opens space and gives validity to transcendence? If you don't have that, you're playing an utterly artificial game. You're fighting an uphill battle, because whatever you discuss and with the patient, he walks out and he's immersed in our cultural narrative that he's just a skin-encapsulated ego destined to die. And what meaning can survive that cultural narrative? What transcendence can possibly survive that cultural narrative? So I think if we have a cultural narrative, a story in our culture that validates transcendence, that validates meaning, the work of the therapist is much easier, because you see, the intellect is the bouncer of the heart, right? You can't try to reach the heart, but it goes via the intellect first. Ideas that the intellect will reject as impossible or nonsensical or ultimately invalid don't stand much of a chance to really penetrate and change the emotional life of your patients. So I think a cultural narrative can help you a lot. It can be conducive to therapy penetrating deeper and really having an emotional impact in the inner life of your patients. And I think it's very important that we change that cultural narrative in this direction.
Well, there are a few therapists in the room, but for my part, I'm not one of them. I'm just your typical neurotic.
I'm neurotic too.
Look for something out of the ideas of Jung as a layperson. Jeff, I guess we turn it back over to you now, or is there someone else to?
Well, we have 6 hours.
Well, thank you very much.
We have some more time. We have some more time.
Are there any more questions? I don't want to force it, but if there are, we can certainly entertain another question.
Hey,
well, Bernardo, thank you so much. When's the book out with this great introduction?
I just got the introduction is the best part of the book, right? I got the proof one last week. It's being reviewed now, so I expect it should be out very early next year if everything goes fine. It's going faster than my previous book, the entire the entire production process. So early next year, it should be out, I hope. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's my best book so far.
Well, thank you so much. We're honored to have you here, and it's a wonderful cap to our 4-week course together.
The honor is mine. I mean, I'm very thankful for what you guys are doing. It surprised me when you told me you would do this. I thought, who am I to deserve this? I mean, but I take the gift and the honor for what it is. I'm very happy you are doing this. To me, it's a great honor.
Great. Well, it's totally mutual, Bernardo. So thank you, and I hope you get some sleep tonight.
I'm gonna get to this immediately. Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys. Have a great evening. Bye.